Okay, it's 6:15, if we can make a start. Good evening, welcome to the Audit and Risk Management special meeting. Item 1, Members' Code of Conduct, Declarations of Interest. Have we got? No. Item 2, Proposed Revised Council Financial Regulations, Contract Procedure Rules, Draft for Consultation. I'll hand over to the Assistant Chief Exec.
Thank you very much, Chair. There are two parts to this agenda. I'll speak to the first one, which is the contract procedure rules. This feels quite different to me. When I first came here, Chris Batman, some of you may remember, gave me 3 bits of advice. You don't go up the carpet on the main stairs, that's what elected members. You don't reply to elected members using their Christian names and letters. And you don't take anything to committees, which is only half done. So for the first time, I've brought you something here which is only half done. It's a work in progress. And it's about looking at the contract procedure rules of the council. As you know, the Improvement Board has asked the council to look at Audit's Constitution, and arising from that, Graham Burgess asked Peter and I to look at the financial rates and the contract procedure rules. In looking at the contract procedure rules that we have in place, and clearly having worked within them for some years, the set that we had were not particularly user-friendly. They weren't easy to follow. They referred you back to all the paragraphs, etc., etc. And they've been amended over the years, mainly as a result of audits, internal and external audits. So they were not user-friendly and they were pretty difficult to follow. Also, in looking at them, I looked at some other authorities' ones which did seem more straightforward. So, putting a group together across the council who used these rules, we had a discussion about should we seek to further modify the ones we've got, or should we look at what seemed to be better examples from other authorities? And we settled on the latter option, really, because having read them and reread them and spent some time specifically on them rather than just using them in your day-to-day work, I think that the complexity of the way they're currently written perhaps explains why they were found to be difficult to follow in some cases. And from that decision to look at other authorities' ones, we settled on looking at the ones from Cheshire West and Chester. And for a number of reasons, we're asking you here to approve the principle that we carry on using those ones as the basis for revising our procedures. And there are a number of reasons for that. A, they are more straightforward and simpler to follow. They step their way through, and they include flow charts. The existing flow charts would be rewritten to suit our revisions. And also, it seemed that they have been tried and tested and used by that authority for some time, and also, therefore, they've been subject to scrutiny. And thirdly, that in an era where we're headed into where we're being encouraged more and more, like all councils, to have shared services, with the only land boundary we have with an authority is with Cheshire West and Chester, and therefore if we've got some commonality with their contract procedure rules, if we do any joint procurement, it would make it a lot easier if our procedures were lined up with theirs. And as you know, in other areas, in other parts of the council, it's been reported to you that there are tentative discussions taking place to do with IT and procurement, for example, and we've got some tentative discussions to do more with them on the children and young people's front. We do some things together now. So clearly, if we have some commonality there, it would make it a lot easier if we make it out a joint contract or whatever. So for those reasons, we're asking you to consider that principle be agreed, that we carry on working using their document as a basis and trying to make the minimum changes to it. And because it's a work in progress, there's an amendment to the recommendation of the report which allows us to carry on working with it and bring it back here if we need to. The principles that come out of that report are that the Cheshire West and Cheshire ones are cleaner and clearer about officer responsibilities and complaints and consequences. That it sets out very early on that the consequences of not following the rules could be serious, and it refers to that again further on through the document. It sets out step by step for each level of procurement, and it includes more detail than the current Wirral regs do. And it also includes some significant additional sections about EU contracting and EU procurement, and also about grants and it does broadly follow the current council guidelines thresholds for tenders and quotes. We are proposing two changes. The first one is that we are proposing that for items up to £500 that you wouldn't need to necessarily get 3 quotes for those in a small number of circumstances. Most items below that value are bought using existing procurement contracts, stationery or whatever, cleaning supplies and things like that. And occasionally there's maybe a one-off where you need to do something which costs up to £500. The example that was given to me was by one of the interim people who's now gone, was a need to courier a document into Manchester, where the time it took to try and get 3 quotes, he felt he could actually have taken the document himself and brought it back, and he didn't feel it was a sensible use of time proportionate to the expenditure in the authority. It clearly doesn't have to be set at £500, you could set it lower than that, and it clearly wouldn't be for the bulk of the things that we buy at that level. The Cheshire document works in similar steps from up to £10,000 and then £10,000 to £50,000, and it uses the same number of quotes. For works, for building works, it allows quotes up to £150,000 rather than 50, which again seems a sensible step forward given the kind of low value contracts that we do, for example, in schools. So the thresholds are broadly similar. That's the only significant additional flexibility. The other significant change is that in the Cheshire document for contract extensions and variations, the head of procurement has to give approval if it's a 20% variation. Currently in our document it's 10% or £50,000, whichever is the lower, to be reported to the Director of Finance, and technical changes subsequently reported to Cabinet. And the reason for moving away from that is that, again, there's been comment by the Improvement Board that Cabinet agendas were way too long previously, and they included things that were being reported to Cabinet. For example, the most recent one was an additional cost on the repainting of one of the 4 bridges, and they didn't really think that it was necessary for stuff like that to be coming to Cabinet. So that's broadly where we've come from. Subject to your approval, we would carry on working on these documents. Any comments you have, we would build into them. We're hoping to work on another draft this week, so we'd appreciate any comments back as soon as possible, and we would bring the final document back to here. In another part of the work that's being developed in the Constitution, this, I'm right, Stephen, this committee would have greater powers in terms of bringing officers to the meeting to explain particular contracts that were selected and discuss the detail of those. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Questions? John?
Yes. Since in a council where we're looking about far greater delegation of the attention to the public, as opposed to the greater burden on the members to scrutinise decisions. I'm not quite clear when I look at 280 on this, and refer back to the environmental matter 26, which is on page 2. I'm not quite clear as to how or the decision on approving expenditure over these 20 seconds, it would be a very significant amount like that. How that would be related to the members in order for them to be able to scrutinise decisions.
David?
I mean, I think again, the starting point we've used is the 20% from the Cheshire document. I mean, again, clearly bringing it to you in this part-written state is to have a discussion about whether that 20% is an appropriate level. The intention would be that rather than each of these contracts being a specific Cabinet report, that there be general lists produced of all the contracts let, and it would be for this committee to have additional scrutiny than it currently has in the past over contracts that have been awarded. And clearly, a contract where there have been additional costs would be one that you would probably want to scrutinise closely.
I wasn't actually discussing the level as such, because we can have an argument all day as to whether you should allow delegation or not.
think that's the change, is that the officer would be enabled to authorise the expenditure. If it was more than 20%, he would require, or she would require, the approval of the head of procurement. And it would be for them to then be subsequently accountable for their actions to members. It wouldn't be for members to approve that expenditure in advance. It would actually clarify, if you like, the officer-member split. So the officer would have to take full responsibility for the decision to agree the additional expenditure.
Why would members have been told that? So that's what it's just talk about officers. I'm trying to find out what point do members get involved, have a say in matters where you could be talking about a lot of that stuff. That business is consultants.
Yeah, I mean the current Wirral rule has 10% or £50,000, whichever is the lower. Clearly the Cheshire document simply has 20% in it. I mean, again, you could build in an additional level if the concern is about a risk of very high levels of additional expenditure. In terms of the member reporting, it is different to the way we've done it here. Clearly, we could bring regular reports of contracts which have been let, and then when contracts are concluded, we can bring the reports of the conclusion of them. But it wouldn't be to bring reports prior to the expenditure being made. But that doesn't actually happen currently. It's a report to the Director of Finance if the expenditure is in excess of £50,000 or 10%, and it's a subsequent report to Cabinet if an officer has taken a decision for operational reasons. So, for example, if an officer has committed additional expenditure because when the roads were opened up, it's been found that the subsurface is a lot worse or something like that, where that sort of technical decision has been taken, they are reported retrospectively.
I'm sorry, we're not happy that we've had a pathway very well in regards to taking position showing how members can be involved, especially their involvement have an impact.
Steve?
Yeah, I'm a bit confused. We've had, I think we've had the presentation on the first part, and then the other issue about delegation. If someone else going to talk about the sort of delegation issues further, and then I'll hold my fire, because John was straight into talking on the second part of the report as well as the first, in a way, John, yeah. So I'm just unsure whether to go for both reports now. If someone's going to give a bit more detail around the delegation issues, that would help me, and then I can sort of transfer back if that is fair.
Sure, yeah. Do you want the second part now then? The Director of Finance.
I think if I do, it is the main thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, can I just while we're still with the first part, just really a general interest. David, you looked at other councils besides Cheshire West. I'm assuming that there's a similarity across most councils, that there's nothing particular about Cheshire West that makes it stand out from other councils. Also, they're a relatively new council, so is this a relatively new document, their document? Have they fairly recently drawn it up, or did they just pick up the old Chester one? And then, finally, I like the idea that over £100 and £10,000. Is there some control, though, to stop somebody, say, wanting £3,000 worth and having 6 orders for £500?
Starting with the last point, yes, there is. It makes clear in the regs that nowhere, and indeed this is an existing rule for Wirral, nowhere is an officer allowed to break down a job of work or items that are required to be bought. You're not allowed to, quite rightly, to break it down into smaller multiples to get below any threshold, be it £500 or £10,000 or £50,000 or whatever. And that would simply be improper. And indeed, it's something that has been in place for some time. So, in terms of the Cheshire rules, they have been in place since the authority was formed. I don't know whether they have their origins in the old Cheshire rules. I think they were written as a new document at the start of that authority, because that authority brought together a number of authorities. It wasn't just half in Cheshire, there were just checked with them as to whether they plan to change the document, and I've asked them as well. And the only thing that they said they might change, they felt that their document had worked well. The only thing that they felt they might change was actually the thresholds, the cash thresholds. They felt they would be tempted to consider increasing them. Now, obviously, clearly, if we change from one system to another, we need to start cautiously, I think. So I wouldn't propose doing that. But apart from that, they were content with them. They said that they hadn't been subject to any adverse criticism. The other ones I looked at were 2 or 3 authorities in the region. I looked at Trafford and a couple of others. These ones, although they're longer, they just seemed to me that they were easier to follow. If you were going to this as a middle manager or somebody maybe who doesn't do procurement every day, you couldn't claim that you couldn't follow them. And particularly if we can adapt the flow charts that are in them as well, and they could obviously be separate to the document. It seems to me that if we're going to have a high level of compliance, these seem to work. Also, although not everybody does it, I think having the EU stuff in there as well, and the grants and the bid stuff in, again, it makes it a comprehensive document.
You touched on there about how Cheshire West were thinking of making a change. Just going forward, in a year's time, this is reviewed and there's a need to make some changes. Does it have to go through this whole process again? Does it have to go to Cabinet? Does it have to go to full council? How does it work as an ongoing document?
Subject to full council adopting the changes proposed to the Constitution, one of the proposals is that this committee should actually have responsibility in future for agreeing changes to the contract procedures and the financial regulations in order for them to be expedited.
So it would be for this committee?
It'll be for this committee.
If this committee was unhappy about something, it would refer it to Cabinet?
It would refer to council. I mean, in the event it felt it was such a decision of such enormity, if you would, it could either obviously turn it down or refer it to full council, yes.
Okay. Okay, enough the interim director of finance.
Thank you, Chair. As just been said, we, in looking at the existing rules, decided that they were sort of rococo, really. They'd been built up and built up and built up. It was very difficult to see where we were going. That was one of the attractions of going in our discussions with Cheshire. We said, can we look at yours? And because they were moving from being a large county to a small operation, but taking on board the districts, they had to completely rewrite and rethink what they had. So in some senses they were going up from a district to a larger authority, in some senses going down from a large county to half a county. So that's why they came up with this set, which we found very attractive. What we've done is introduce some things that they haven't thought about, particularly start at page 13. One of the common features in many local authorities is the absolute split between employee expenditure and non-employee expenditure. So you can see in 281 there that what we're saying there is that it is not possible to divide from employee budgets to non-employee budgets, which is a form of help from page 13, a form of help to the authority in keeping some basic sort of rules in terms of shape of the budget process. You turn the page, you can see from 282 through page 14, 15, 16, 17, limits that are being proposed here, which are very similar to the sort of limits you find in most other local authorities of this size. And we've taken advantage of the fact that you want to make sure that there's ability to both move quickly in making decisions, but also to have controls, so that we haven't burdened secretary administrative functions, and thinking that we prefer to spend your time on the policy stuff. Where it starts tripping to policy with the larger figures, they obviously it's referred to members. We've taken advantage, as has just been said, of the fact that for council perhaps can find it easier to delegate some of this stuff to this committee, so this committee in fact becomes more powerful in that sense. So again, because you meet more frequently, you get a quicker turnaround. So the other thing we've done is we've built in references to legislation that applies to directors of resources. Memory is on about page 31. And you'll see there, page 30, make reference to the role of the director of resources and also the advice that is around at the moment, as you can see at the top there, of the role of the director of resources, which is quite important. We're perhaps need to strengthen that by saying that any departure from this way of seeing things should be referenced in a specific report to council, which is called compliance or explain. So we need to build that in slightly. But overall, we think this is a major step forward for the council. There is one small little glitch, page 41. If you want to know what one business protocols are, it's a Cheshireism that you need to sort out. That's the chair.
Thank you, Peter. Questions? Steve?
Yeah, a couple of issues. A bit sort of like John, it is difficult to move away from things that we know, but we do also know those things that we had in the past clearly didn't work. You know, there were a number of occasions where they didn't, and one of the main themes of criticism was that things that were happening, overspends, etc., weren't being reported anywhere until it was too late. So it was, oh, why has that happened? Now, a bit like John, I'm anxious to see that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and have some sort of way of recording, reporting, and I quite like the idea, linking the two reports together. If I was the head of service and one of my contracts was going to be overspent for perfectly valid reasons, both of us as an officer and protection of the elected members, I would have expected somewhere in the mechanism a conversation, at least in initial stages, between the head of service and the cabinet member, perhaps. Now, you know, I wouldn't want to be a cabinet member who suddenly was exposed at this committee to say the contract you met a year ago has now been exceeded by 25% in cost, and as John says, that can be some sort of sum. So I want the elected members and the officers to work as a team. I don't think it's for us, as the Audit Committee may have said this before, it's not for us to dictate the policy or direction of travel. That's being dictated, I think, by the Improvement Board, and we're here to ensure what they're doing is safe and sound, and we can monitor it and have an input. So I think the direction of travel is right, but I think the methodology should encourage those sort of conversations to take place and be recorded effectively, which is one of the other criticisms we had. Officers were acting in good faith, but weren't writing it down anywhere or recording, or in some cases we're having one-to-one conversations without any witness to the interaction that was going on, and that left us vulnerable. So I think the criticism from the district auditor in many respects was we weren't doing anything dishonest, but it was very hard to prove that we weren't doing it dishonest because there was nothing ever recorded anyway. And, you know, so for the sake of clarity, I think those sort of issues need to be woven into it. Now, we do have delegated decisions that are made on a regular basis, say where a piece of land has been declared surplus and the sort of cabinet member says, look, we're going to let this go, it's not going to result in a cabinet report if nobody says anything otherwise. And I'm just wondering whether, when these conversations take place between cabinet members and heads of service, is there a mechanism for them to be, and I think under the delegation, weaving the delegation into the procurement and the contract letting, I think somehow there's a possibility there of those conversations being in the public domain, as opposed to just a conversation and it recorded and formally recorded. Now that shouldn't slow things up, because 9 times out of 10 the reasons will be proper, legitimate reasons why there's an overspend. You go into a house, take the wall off, you find asbestos, suddenly you've got an issue that needs to be dealt with there, and then you can't leave asbestos lying around. And we are aware of those sort of things happening. So I think that's the other thing. I'll finish my little bit off and then you can come back on it. The other thing I like about the first part of the exercise is the consequences are absolutely clear to people engaged in the process, that there is a consequence to not engaging in the process and not following it to the letter. I think we've criticised in the past that officers have not followed the procedures, as confusing as they may have been, and walked away scot-free, no sort of challenge being made. But this is quite implicit, and I liked it so much that I've been appointed to the Audit Committee on Merseytravel, which for the first time has an Audit Committee in its history, and I made sure that all their policies, none of their policies had to line in that if people don't follow the policies, there will be a consequence. So I'm thinking now from Wirral's sort of move to encourage good behaviour over on that one. I'm presuming this has got the okay, or will need the okay of the Improvement Board as a way forward. I'm anxious to hear the comments of Audit about whether they're familiar with these type of procedures, and are they enforceable, are they reportable, and can you do? But I just think for senior officers' protection and members' protection, that if a reporting mechanism could be woven into the delegation, then it shouldn't slow anything down, and everyone would feel a lot more relaxed about, well, not relaxed, but everyone would feel safer that the decisions that were being made were the result of A, technical heads of service input, and valid reasons for that, A, and B, you would have talked to the senior politician involved, and that senior politician and the head of service would have a mechanism through the email, internet system to say, look, this is what we're having to do, with all safeguards that would mean in terms of contractual and negotiations and commercial value, etc. I think that there's a way of doing that. Perhaps, I would need some more reassurance along those lines. But I don't think it's for us to dictate the direction of travel. It's for us to make sure that that direction of travel is a safe one, and use our knowledge or our talents around this table to help that process be even safer and reassure not ourselves but the people who pay our wages, people who pay the council tax. So they're my comments, Chair.
Thanks, Ross. Anything Peter wants to come back to some for you there?
Two things. If you turn to page 24 of the supplemental, you'll see in 366, I hope it's part of an answer to your concern, that we report at least monthly to the Executive Board. So whereas before the reporting to sorry, page 24, 366, whereas before this wasn't written down and reporting used to take place quarterly, we've now got it hard baked in here that it should be at least monthly. And behind that reporting cycle is very obviously a briefing with the Cabinet member before you get to the Cabinet. So in that sense they're involved. You'll see also in here there's reference to training of staff. And this morning I spent 2 hours in front of about 80 cost centre managers starting that training process. We've got another meeting on Wednesday. I'm happy to share the slide deck with you so you can see what we're attempting to achieve. But in essence what we're trying to do is build a dialogue between finance and the cost centre managers, the service departments, so that whereas before finance used to be done to them, we have a process now where they sign for their budgets and they can complain. There's a box that they can write in and say, this is where it is wrong. Also, we've asked them to rate themselves in terms of traffic lights as to how confident they feel in finance. So over a number of years, we could move to having fewer cost-center managers who are red and feel that they can't manage the process, to a situation over a number of years very quickly, they'll all be green. They will be saying, we have confidence in what we're doing, we know what we're doing. So behind the text here, which, as I said, is hard-baked in requiring us to have a dialogue with members on a regular basis, there's also the start of a process whereby we'll be completely explicit with the budget holders and seeking their assistance in arriving at good budgets. That's where it all starts. So that's an example I hope that will give you some comfort in a completely different and better approach.
Thanks, John.
I agree with what Steve said. There's a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of good stuff. I don't think now that there's a lot of good stuff. What I'm still not happy about, I have to listen to what he said. Not happy with the development on that, where the expenditure exceeds 70 to 20%. And certainly, we might have a one party cabinet here, but it's a multi-party council. Certainly, I think that if any expenditure going to go through like that, at least the spokesman on this issue is going to be responsible for investigating rather than any other. Should also be informed. I would be happy to let that into the agreement.
Steve.
Thank you, John. I hope I can give the members some comfort. What I have said to the chief officers when I've redrafted the Constitution is that actually it's a two-edged sword, because some of the things that are in there are actually quite onerous on the officer caste as well as on the members. And one of the things I've written in explicitly is that all delegations confirmed under this scheme must be recorded in writing by the directors or by the people that the directors authorise. The directors, however, remain accountable, and the monitoring officer will maintain a central record of those delegations available for public inspection. That's quite a different regime to the one we operate at the moment, and I think it's a transparent and accountable regime. And one of the things we've got to work on is how we make that work. It's all very well to put the words in the document, but actually to make that live and to be real, I think will require a change of behaviour and attitude by a number of parts of the organisation. But we're working on that. But I hope that gives some comfort that actually, with the increased responsibility, goes increased accountability, and the transparency will enable that accountability to be real. Well, what I could say, sir, is that it will say that the central record of those delegations, it will be published by the committee services, and we can make sure that it's cascaded out as appropriate, as, for example, are the portfolio delegations at the moment.
That is the sort of level of reassurance that I was seeking, that this dialogue is both encouraged, because it hasn't happened in the past. It just happened, and we found out about it later on down the line. My advice is to say the least on occasion. So that dialogue, members have to be proactive as well. If that registerable or that central file is available, we will know where to find it. And quite often the explanation will be quite a logical explanation. And when we're all common sense people, we're not going to find the system for safety. If someone then pulls the rabbit out of their hat in 6 months' time, and they've been recorded 6 months previous, that's our fault, not the officer's fault, not the cabinet member's fault. So we will not pay.
David.
Just a couple of points on that conversation. Just a general point to begin with. Peter's right. I mean, for the first time, I'm training this afternoon, Andrew Roberts and I have actually physically signed for the Children in Wirral Schools budget and also for the asset management budget. So that's a very different feeling to how it's been previously. Indeed, with the assets budget, it's a source of instant worry, really. But, so I think it is part of a changing culture. I think it is part of a different way of ownership of those budgets. In terms of
accountability, I absolutely understand the point that's being made. A couple of things on that. Firstly, Graham Burgess has put in place a more structured regime of monthly meetings between the relevant director and the cabinet member. And when I say structured, I mean to a formal agenda where the meetings are minuted and there's a member of the change team present and a member of the finance team present, as well as the staff in the department. And one of the items on that agenda is budget matters. And I fully expect that if a contract there was a variation in the contract or an exception to it or a particular problem with the contract, that would be reported at that meeting and would be documented. In terms of reporting to the wider membership of the council, currently we take reports to scrutiny committees for contracts over £50,000. So a person I work with called Malcolm Street, for every scrutiny committee, he writes a report of contracts over £50,000. And ours is a motley collection. It's sometimes costs of putting a child into care, it's sometimes contracts like for Metro Catering, and it's sometimes building contracts as well. It's always struck me that that report doesn't sit easily alongside the other agenda at that meeting, because it's all about exam results or adoption or fostering or reading or youth service or whatever. And the report gets scant attention normally at the end of the agenda. Those contracts can't be pulled together quite easily. The process is there and brought as one report to here. And my hope would be then that with the revised constitution, you will then have greater power to require officers to come here and give you the detail on specific contracts. Because I don't think that's happened to a great degree before.
Okay, the other two questions were improvement board, and they are on this call of the improvement plan, which we all signed up for, all parties. And the second one was, I'd like some comment from Audit.
So first off, Dave, is this what the improvement board have indicated?
My understanding is that this is following the wishes of the improvement board. Clearly, these documents haven't been back to the final state, but this is part of the process. This is only a relatively modest part of the process of revising how the council works to meet the improvement agenda.
Thank you. And if you can ask Mike.
Yes, sure. Thanks, Chair. Just in terms of the improvement board, I obviously sit as part of that board as a sort of advisor to it, as it were. And it is part of that process. And I think where I was going to start is sort of welcoming the changes that are taking place, but in the wider context of the Constitution and some of the things that Stephen alluded to in terms of the change of behaviours and the sort of wider context of all of that, which this as one document and a set of rules sort of starts to fit in amongst. And what is helpful, I think, also is the sort of questions around the table, but also what seems to be coming back from the training, in the sense that what David has said, I think what Peter has said around, people start to have that dialogue about how do these things work and how do we make it work best for Wirral as we go forward. What's pleasing from a sort of external audit point of view is, as you say, it's a sort of almost new set of documents, but I can certainly see in there, the concerns that we've raised over the years, and some of those have been quite specific concerns, but some of them have been around interpretation and where do we go next, and it seems like there is still sort of a debate to be had about some elements of that. I think, that looks like that's taking place, and that's a healthy debate. I think for any set of rules like this to sort of bed in, it probably takes a good 12 months, because there will be questions. And I suppose the role of this committee and the monitoring officer and the Section 151 officer is to make sure, you're picking up the questions as they come along, and using internal audit to be the sort of key part of your eyes and ears in relation to that. From the external audit point of view, we only came into some of these contractual things because of complaints to us and specific issues we raised, particularly, not specifically on the highways report, but on grant reports. So the other things I would welcome from this is the extension, I think, as David said, beyond what you would purely think were just the contract procedural rules into the EU, into the grants and other types of partnering arrangements that the council has. The thing that underpins all this for me is the rules are there to be as specific as they can. They can't always be, there for every circumstance, but you do need something in place that then says, well, we go and do this, and we make sure a different rule is followed in terms of coming to a sensible conclusion on behalf of the council that everybody can sign on to. So I think overall I say welcome what's in there. I've read through them, I've got some specific comments. Liz and I have had a read through, and I'd probably best pass them through to David, and you know, hopefully that will help you move forward. I mean, the other thing with this is, the key is the training, the sort of changes in the behaviours, and you know, making sure the time scale is right, and you know, that will be key to make sure you pick up from here on in when it gets approved by council and when they get adopted by the council. Because what is key in all the time I've been an auditor is, if you ever get into a position where you need to go and fall back on the sanctions within a document like this in an HR disciplinary process, if it's not clear, then you know, the council is open to, you know, it puts itself in a difficult position from the start. And I must admit, in all the time I've been an auditor, I've seen quite a number of these documents which have been kept in draft for such a long time that they become almost meaningless. So the key to it is making sure you get them signed up and signed off, because you know, you won't be able to use them properly otherwise. So welcome the documents. Interestingly, I picked up on the point about reporting to members. In a sense, that's a bit of a risk sort of judgment for yourselves, but there's always a balance in these things between flexibility and making the decisions. And it sounds from the wider constitutional changes that the feel for that is much more of a delegated organisation, authority within the organisation to get on and do things rather than be, in a sense, maybe hamstrung by, as David said, council agendas which are 30 or 40 items long and really probably never got the right scrutiny. So it's all part of that wider agenda about being focused, prioritising, and members particularly putting probably their efforts in the most important places.
Thanks, sir. Steve?
Just one other thing. Just something that happened in the past. I think it's important to get my own head around. It's fairly clear on things like specific cash figures that, you know, or sums set a trigger off. There are other things that happen in terms of procurement and contracting. Example I'll give, when we're going through one large contract, the Parks and Gardens one, a contractor was deemed at one point in the procedure not to be up for, so you know, to do the financial checks, they hadn't given enough information, that contractor was deemed to be out of the process. And then lo and behold, somewhere within that process, the contractor had written back, proved that they were, you know, worthy of bidding for the contract, and ended up being one of the more successful of the bidders. I won't mention any names, but that procedure of them going out was known. But the procedure of them coming back into the process was done at what level, I don't know. Never been able to find out. So there needs to be things that aren't cash specific but significant change. Now probably there are in there, but you know, that sort of thing, that's not a cash figure but a circumstance that happens during the process. We need some reassurance within that if there's a significant change or with it, you know, during the contract process. And I think that's a fairly good example that doesn't fit a cash trigger or a sum figure, but it's a significant change that we all should have known about, because believe you me, it was very difficult to persuade those people who felt they were under threat from the contractors to say, how could a contractor be deemed unfit at one stage, then fit during the process, and nobody be told about it. So they're the sort of real things that can happen.
I mean, I think that's one reason why I like the idea of including the EU stuff, because you know, the high value contracts only get worked on by a very small number of people in the council. I mean, I've only ever been involved with one. So I think if that's there, again, it brings it all out into the open domain, that when you get into those big contracts over those values, there are procedures to be followed, and by setting them out here, all right, I'm sure everybody won't sit down and read them every time they use the document, but they're there, and again, it sets out clearly what should and should not happen, brings them out to a wider domain.
Councillor Watt?
Thank you. Just a detail, in the second report on page 45, 5.8, it makes clear that the financial
financial regulations will apply to the Merseyside Pension Fund. But is there a similar provision in the first report on the contract procedure rules?
Yeah, just something reading 2.8.4, talking about revenue budgets carried forward. I suppose it'll be naive in a sense, but it does seem to be encouraging robbing Peter to pay Paul, in the sense that, I'm not sure what the plan of understanding is, but anyway, leaving that aside, it's saying, take your underspends and you can use those to pay off your overspends. In an ideal, transparent world, I want to know what the underspends are, and I want to know what the overspends are. This document, I understand what it's saying, but it just seems to be almost encouraging that kind of approach.
The way I've done it in other authorities, which is what I'm trying to introduce here, is that first of all you have a budget with balances, so you hopefully don't get any massive overspends, which we suffered last year. And what happens is that you reward good behaviour, in that if somebody underspends, a directorate underspends, they can then, following certain rules, bid to have it carried forward. And in previous places, that's been a decision by members. If they overspend, they have to pay it back the following year. So that's the way you get the stick and the carrot. So concentrating on just the one, the use of underspends and the ability to carry them forward, is only half the story. And what we're trying to do also is to, given that little carrot, is to stop people rushing to spend our budget by the end of the year. And it's always the oft-repeated tale, how true it is, I don't know, that people will use up their budgets by the end of the year, regardless of whether it's sensible expenditures or not, because they're afraid that they'll get less the following year. What we're doing here is saying that if it's the case that there's some sort of project that they were wanting to complete, but for some reasons of delays, and therefore that money was not spent, but you still have that demand in the system, then it makes sense to have a procedure which allows for the carrying forward of funds to complete that project. You'd already voted for the money anyway. So that's the thinking that lies behind all of the words here about underspends. But it is part of a package of trying to deal with overspends as well.
Yeah, I mean, just totally agree, and I like the idea of allowing underspends to be carried forward and to get away from that traditional rush at the end of the year. But in the same way as that's a traditional rush, there's a traditional feeling that a department, in order to balance its budget, has things in there which probably it's never going to spend, and it uses that to cushion other areas. In an ideal world, that shouldn't be the case. And we need to, ideally, we need to see which projects have overspent, rather than you just say, well, if you've got underspend, you use those to offset your overspends, and we never really get the budgets set up exactly, aligned to what they're actually going to spend the money on.
Well, what we've done reducing this year's budget is to ensure that budgets are corrected. And part of this training was introducing cost centre managers to how they can better forecast and how they can make sure their budget actually flows according to how the spend happens, because sometimes budgets are lumpy, the spend is lumpy. So part of today's training exercise was to improve the ability of people to manage their budgets. It is the case that because of the downward pressure on local government, we're taking out doing what we're doing is to move to find tolerances, so that where it is the case at the end of the year that the budget has been underspent, we want to know why, because that will allow us to have less cuts, if you like. If there's some spare money because that budget was always overcooked and it was, if you like, the back pocket of somebody, therefore that money's been lying around, and it's better to take that money out than to cut some service to somebody. And that's what we're trying to do. That's the whole point of trying to ensure that the budgets are correctly set up, so that people are trained in how to manage them, and where at the end of the year we can then see that there are underspends, ask the question, why? Will it be repeated? Was it a one-off? Is it a possibility of us taking that out in the next budget round? And if you remember, in our list of 10 items of how we look at how we construct a budget, one of them is to revisit the current way we set things up and see if there are any spare monies lying around. So we have that explicitly as part of our process for looking at budgets for the following years.
Okay. Steve?
Sorry, again, Chair. I understand that exactly where you're coming from. And we've spoke for many years, haven't we, about zero budgeting, about we've had a traditional accounting system where there were boxes with money in, and officers would go into their silo, protect those boxes of money, whether they were needed or not, because, as you say, at the end of the day, I think by encouraging that sort of behaviour, and it's not going to happen overnight, otherwise we'd have done it by now, you can go to possibly, in the longer term, look at output-based budgets, so you measure what the outputs are at the end, and those departments achieve them with a budget. That's the Shangri-La, isn't it, of zero budget, is you actually realise what you want to do, and then recost what it costs to do that. Now, we've always talked about it, all three parties, I think, have talked about it as a way forward, and it hasn't happened, but this seems, if I understand your logic, that's a step in that direction, but it's not going to happen overnight.
Okay. Any more questions or comments? Can we move to the recommendation then? And we've all had the extra 4 recommendations. Can we agree then?
I agree.
Okay.
Take a vote.
Shall I take a vote? Okay, all those in favour of the recommendation? All those against? Abstentions? Okay.
Keep on coming back on member involvement, so
We do have an item 5, any other business. You may remember that sometime earlier on at the start of this committee cycle last year, it was the committee wanted some training, and if I can ask the acting senior general, is that an update, please, Mark?
Yeah, we have prepared a training presentation, and you were emailed the details of that a couple of weeks back. We've had very little response to the emails. We proposed a couple of days towards the end of this month, early May, where we were trying to get you all together and sort of run through the training slides and talk you through the self-assessment exercise taken by the chair. If I could just remind you all to revisit that sort of email and try and provide us with some sort of details of your availability over the next few weeks. For those of you that perhaps haven't seen the email as of late, so then perhaps I can resend it, maybe sort of remind you of the dates that we're proposing. Okay, I can do that.
Okay. Okay, thank you all for coming. Thanks for your attendance.